All right. Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking to James Agnew. James, thanks for being here, man.
Oh, thanks for having
James
me. I
is,
appreciate it.
oh, yeah, heck yeah. James is an actual real theologian, guys. So a doctorate, right? You're a
Yeah.
doctor? Dr.
Yes.
James Agnew. Okay. We're going to be going over the same questions that I went over with Kai in my last video, which was kind of a debate style. This one's, I think I'm going to be shooting for more just conversational. James, would you describe yourself as like, you're not a classical theist, you're a little more of a kind of independent thinker. How would you, I don't know, how do you line up with the kind of more mainstream views of the hypostatic union or the Trinity? Like,
Yeah. So I would say I think I'm probably on in the kind of denominational range, whatever. I'm probably pretty close to mainstream, like typical Protestant like Christianity or something over there.
mm,
I do have views that are more maverick or more divergent than what you're gonna see in a lot of maybe a lot of typical people in that stream of maybe like in that kind of genre or area. The boundaries of these things, I think, to me at least, are kind of fuzzy. So that's why I'm saying I'm like, oh, kind of in this area. So yeah, I have some maybe diverging positions about like my model of the Trinity or like how I view like the incarnation, stuff like that. But I'm still like maybe a typical what you would expect. Um, Generic Christian when it comes to like, okay, I'm gonna like affirm the incarnation. I'm gonna affirm like the deity and humanity of Christ. I'm gonna affirm the Trinity, something along those lines, so on and so forth. Yeah.
nice. Perfect. Sounds good. And yeah, where can people kind of see your stuff or read your books? Where could people refer to you after they undoubtedly listen to our conversation and say, I want to hear more from that guy?
Yeah, so after they were wowed by my my intellectual abilities or amused by my lack thereof, they can I've published three books. All three of these are free on Amazon. The ebooks are free. The most recent one, which is actually probably going to be relevant to some of the stuff we talk about today, is called The Lord Appeared, Jesus as Yahweh in the Old Testament. Um, I suspect some of the stuff we'll talk about will be related to this. This book is mainly an argument for divine Christology. Um, that's the most recent one, and I have a chapter in there where I kind of expound upon and outline and defend like how I view the relationship of Jesus and Yahweh, and talk about models of the Trinity and whatnot. Another book that's probably going to be relevant. This is the second one I published, What Jesus Didn't Know: A Defense of Canonic Christology. This is a slightly modified copy of my doctoral dissertation, where I defend the idea that in the incarnation, Jesus like gives up knowledge, abilities, stuff like that. How does that affect, affirmations of him being divine, so on and so forth. This also is related to some. I talk about like my model of the Trinity, or like what was my model of the Trinity. And this, I've kind of like altered my views a little bit. So like the yellow book, the one that's more recent, is a bit more of kind of an updated, my thoughts and whatnot. And then outside of the kind of Trinity incarnation stuff, the very first book I published, which I think is probably the one that I'm like known the most for, is called The Devil's Disbarment, Exploring Christ's Victory in the Divine Council. This is about atonement, how it is that Jesus saved us. And this, I've had people. I know someone who is a Jehovah Witness, and he really likes this book. I don't. I've talked to people who are not Trinitarians. I've talked to a gentleman who is a Unitarian, and I think he had me on to talk about the stuff in that book. So that book is not like overtly like in your face, like Trinitarian or something like that. So people may find that interesting and thought provoking, even if they disagree with me on other stuff. Um, yeah, so those are my books. I have, in theory, like, I mean, I have a channel, a YouTube channel called In Philosopher's Garb, where I put up videos on kind of just a variety of things. I've kind of been all over the place. I'm trying to maybe streamline my content a little bit more and stop being all over the place with stuff related to philosophy, theology, biblical studies, stuff like that. So those three areas, my YouTube, which is just kind of all over the place, and then those three books, which are all free on Amazon for now. Yeah.
Nice. Heck yeah. So everyone go check those out. Your YouTube content is very consumable. Like even though you're a trained theologian, I found myself able to like follow your argumentation and you like speak in a way that us LDS people understand. Um, like there's a lot of times when I'm talking to a Christian apologist or something like that, and I'm like, I just don't even know what you're saying. Like, I don't
I'm
know what
very
these words
sympathetic.
mean. I don't know what you mean by like just a whole variety of things. Also, sorry guys, my video's lagging, but my voice is still coming over. Okay, not laggy. Okay, great. Sorry about that, everybody. But yeah, you just speak in a way that's very coherent and would highly recommend. And I James pushes back on a lot of things that maybe LDS people wouldn't agree with as well, like things like divine simplicity, or like immutability. I think you would probably reject like the
Oh
strictest
yeah.
sense of immutability. So
Hmm.
some crossover there that is really good. So anyway, any other thoughts, James, or should we jump into it?
I think it's time for you to attack me.
All right,
I think it's that hour.
you
Yeah.
think I'm attacking you?
I mean, I might be a little bit disappointed if you don't. You know, I mean, come on. That's where all the fun is.
Oh, I see.
I'm a
Okay.
theologian. You don't have to hold back. I'm not gonna be. Yeah, there it is. I
Well,
remember you bringing up this argument in your other thing. Yeah, let's do it.
I am not a theologian, James, so you are probably going to walk all over me. So that's why I'm making very sure that to say that this is not a debate, because if I say a debate, all my comments will be, Shiloh, you lost the debate. So
I don't view this as that. I view this as like we're fellow students comparing notes. You know, we're that's the type of disposition that I want to have with this stuff. And I am sympathetic with there are things that I hear the people on like my side or more closer to my side say, and I'm just like I what are you talking about? Like and I suspect some of that will come up as we talk through this. So I'm sympathetic to a lot of the confusion that people have to maybe typical ways that these things get discussed.
well, I appreciate that. And this may be our first, this is maybe one of the things I'm most confused about wrapping my head around. So it's going to be the hypostatic union, which, for those who might not be super familiar with this is basically the idea that Jesus, the person of Jesus, had both a divine and a human nature. Um, and then maybe we can go as farther to say Chalcedon said that he maintained both the divine and human nature. So let's just go to the Creed of Chalcedon just to like read what it
Mhm,
says. I just got this off of legionnaire.org. And this is a statement from it. So, one and the same Christ, Son, Lord, only begotten, acknowledged in two natures, unconfusedly, unchangeably, indivisibly, inseparably, the difference of the two natures being in no way removed because of the union, but rather the properties of each nature being preserved and both concurring into one person and one hypostasis. So how I understand this, and James, maybe you can tell me how you understand this before we move on to like what doesn't make sense about it to me. But
mhm,
how I'm understanding this is Jesus had two natures, one that had divine properties and one that had human properties. And it seems to me like he maintained those during his earthly ministry. That's how I would interpret like them being unchangeable or
mhm.
in no way being removed. At least that's how I think Chalcedon would say it. I'm not sure if that's how you would say the Bible is portraying it, but that's at least how, in my opinion, Chalcedon is describing it. How do you disagree with me? Do you disagree with me?
Yeah, so maybe a bit of context would help here. So the time that this stuff is going on, there's kind of already this desire in at least large branches of Christianity to want to affirm like the deity of Christ and his humanity and stuff like that. And then there's this debate that goes around this time period. And two big figures are Cyril and Nestorius. You've probably heard of like Nestorianism and whatnot. So
Mhm.
anyways, there's debates going along about how many natures does Christ have? So, and the reason I want to start here is you can actually be a Christian and affirm, you know, like the deity of Christ and humanity of Christ and whatnot, and you can reject the hypostatic union. So there are a branch of Christendom that affirms one nature in Christ. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's like the Coptic Church. They go that route. So yeah, so the hypostatic union is this answer that you have guys like Cyril who they advance in this debate of like how to. among the people who want to affirm that there are two natures in Christ, this is how we understand it. But you could say, okay, listen, I don't think there's two natures. I think that the two natures they make up, they become one nature or something like that, and you can still kind of affirm these other things. And there are branches of Christendom that do that. Okay, so that said, then we go to Chalcedon. Um, Chalcedon is vague. It doesn't give us really strong, clear. It kind of sets up guardrails of more of like, here are the things you can't say. But after Chalcedon happened, there was discontent. So Ryan Mullins has a paper called The Two Sons Warrior where he kind of talks about some of this stuff. It's good. It's free on his website. There was discontent about Chalcedon. There were Christians who like called it a sickness. There was confusion about some of the people who it was meant to condemn. They were like, this is fine, like this is fine, like I don't have an issue with this. So then there was like continued controversy. So with that context said, um when it comes to maybe typical ways that people talk about Christ having two natures, this is one of my issues. This is where I'm gonna poke and prod at the type of language that a lot of people on like my side are say. I think we need to ask the question, what is a nature? What does it mean to say that James has X nature, right? To me, how I understand this is I'm going to say, to say that I have a human nature is just to say, like, if we were to make a list of all the properties that a person would need to exemplify in order to be called human, I just meet all that list of properties. Like, that's all it means to me. I don't think there's like an object called a nature that like exists
Sure.
and it's like attached to me or something, right? So maybe
Right.
here's a way to think about it. If I said the cat was on the couch and the cat that was on the couch was beautiful, right? So like in that sentence, we understand that like the cat, it is referring to an object, it's like sitting on a couch, and we're predicating a property to the cat. But if I told you the view at the top of the mountain was beautiful, right? The same syntax, like the syntax of that is very similar. But like, I'm not saying that if you climb up to the top of this mountain, there's an object called the view that is like floating at the top of the mountain, and like I'm predicating that this object has that, right? Like it's this way we talk. Um, and so something that I have deep problems with people on maybe like my side of the equation and online internet apologists is I think there's confusion on whether or not they're using a nature to refer to an object that exists. And I think the language of Chalcedon that you read, I think it does seem to talk about that. It's like it's treating it like these almost like two mixtures and two different vials. And like, okay, we're gonna have them close, but we're not gonna mix them and we're not gonna divide them. Like it seems to me like it's treating them like objects. Um, and so where I'm going to depart, I'm saying like I just don't think these are objects. I think that to say that how I use these terms and how I describe these things in my theology is I'm going to say I think that Jesus meets the properties, like he possesses the properties to rightfully be called divine, and I'm going to say I think he possesses the properties to rightfully be called human. But I don't think like Jesus has like this metaphysical backpack and he's like rummaging around like okay, there's my divine nature, like there's my human nature. Like I just and 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 to be fair, there's vagueness on that, and I've read, I think it's a Catholic theologian who I read a little bit of when I was doing my doctorate, and I think even he talked about maybe there's some like vagueness with this nature language. So I don't think this is just something that I'm like, it's just me spotting. Um, so maybe one thing here's what in general I think people should do, like they should talk about what is a nature. And then I'll say this, and then I'll throw it back to you. I think some of the ways that typical like Orthodox Christians or people who view that way, the way they use nature is to kind of like as a magic wand to solve problems. Whether you view it as like my sense of like this is just a list of properties you exemplify, or whether they view it as like a type of object, I'm inclined to think like pick which one, and I'll kind of operate under that framework. I don't think it solves these problems of like contradictions of like he knew and he didn't know and then stuff like that. So maybe already this is why I'm departing from like orthodoxy and pointing out like I don't like this language of natures being treated like objects. Yeah.
Interesting. So let me just ask a few clarifying questions. Well, let me
Mhm.
pull my slide back up and then let me share something with you. So the first thing that I'm going to say has been confusing to me is that so we would say that Jesus is fully human and humans, you talked about a list of attributes.
Mhm.
So some of those attributes might include corporeal or having a body, temporal, being subject to time. Jesus is fully God. And so, what are the attributes of God? Well, typically they're thought to be things like incorporeal or timeless, which to me seem to be the exact opposite of the attributes to be fully human. So I failed to see how he can be in possession of these things. So you said, James, that you
Mhm.
think he can be considered fully human and divine because he has the attributes that make him fully human and has the attributes that make him fully divine. Did I hear you correctly when you said that? Okay.
Yeah, something along
So,
those lines. Yeah.
so are you affirming, or are you saying like he wouldn't have to have incorporeality to be fully God, or he wouldn't have to have timelessness to be fully God? Or would you say, I don't suspect you'll say this, but I've heard a lot, yes, he is both incorporeal and corporeal, and it's a mystery how that is possible. But no, how would I don't suspect that's the route you're gonna take, but
No, that
yeah.
route irritates me. I when I hear people say that, I'm like, guys, listen, like the foundational block of like how we reason about things is like the it does this come out to be a contradiction, right? Like there's a lot of different ways you can argue about things when it comes to philosophy, but if you can show that your opponent's position results in an outright like contradiction, like that is I think about as close to a slam dunk as you can get in philosophy. Like, and if you're just saying, "Yo, yeah, we've got this contradiction," and wave the mystery wand, like it sure does seem like you've got a lot of problems here, and that seems to be like a stopping point from reasoning. And then you can't. It seems like you can't critique anybody else for anything. Like if I'm going to say I have a bona fide contradiction, I just don't think I have grounds to critique anybody else's view, no matter how ridiculous I think they are. It's probably less ridiculous than a contradiction. Um, so I think Christians who kind of wave the magic contradiction wand, or they say, "Oh, but it's in his human nature, and it's both. One is in this nature, one is in the other." I could give a whole thing about that. So I'm not going to go with that. You're right on that part. You've predicted correctly. Do you mind pulling that slide back up real quick?
Oh, sure, sure, sure.
One thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to okay, there we go. I'm going to point out as like a starting point. I don't think in general, so like even outside of conversations about like Jesus and whatnot, I'm not going to affirm that God is timeless. I'm not going to affirm that God is immutable and passable and things like that. So I'm influenced by philosophers like Ryan Mullins, who has extensively critiqued classical theism. He has a book called End of the Timeless God. He recently came out with a book called Divine Time Maker to Divine Watchmaker, I think it's called, and it's free now. Like it got put out for free. It's a very, very good book. It's like it is heavy academic, philosophical theology. So regardless, I'm gonna say I don't think God's timeless. God is temporal. He experiences succession. There's before and after, and his point of view and stuff like that. I'm gonna reject immutability and passability and stuff like that. So. Um, um, I'll say that, and I've actually had conversations. I think maybe with a Thomas. I think you can maybe find on my YouTube somewhere where I have a conversation with someone, and they're trying to affirm immutability, and I'm like, okay, so like, then how did God become incarnate? Because it's like he wasn't incarnate, and then he was incarnate, and they're like, oh, well, like he just assumed a nature. I'm like, okay, let's go with that. Like he didn't have a human nature, and then he did have a human nature. Like that's still like of secession is still change. Okay, so maybe let's go. Let's so those are kind of like maybe clarifying remarks, but I want to get more to the meat of I think what's going on here. Um, I think we need to talk about what are like the difference between essential properties and accidental properties. Are you familiar with that distinction in philosophy?
No, not hugely. No.
Yeah, so accidental properties is so like right now I have the property of I'm wearing a headset. That property, it's not essential. Like I could exist and not have that property. So I could take them off and like walk away and so on and so forth. I'm bald. Theoretically, I'm we're close to bald, right? I'm bald adjacent, and I could theoretically like I could grow my hair out. So like the property of being bald adjacent or whatever it is I am, I could no longer have that property, but I would still exist. Like it wouldn't be like me, the person talking to you, if I decided to like grow out my hair more. It wouldn't be like I cease to exist because that's an accidental property. But then there are some like properties that are essential. So here's maybe an analysis. If I have like a cube or something like that, or we'll just keep it simple, 2D, like a triangle. An essential property of a triangle is having three sides. Like you cannot give up that property and continue to be a triangle. So one of the things that I think gets messy and maybe confusing with these type of conversations is um, assuming that some things which are accidental properties are actually essential properties. Maybe you want to say, listen, a property of being human is beginning to exist, being created at a certain point in time, stuff like that. And what I'm going to say is like I think that's actually probably an accidental property. I don't think that's a property that is essential to being human. And this is where these debates actually get the rubber hits the road in a way that people don't like to talk about, which is like there's actually really no or there's it's difficult to put clear-cut boundaries on what are the essential attributes of humanity or divinity and stuff like that. Like this kind of comes to an area where if you're gonna put forth a view and I'm gonna put forth a view, it's pretty difficult to just show definitively that like your set of properties for what are essential and my set of
Sure.
properties. Like it's pretty difficult to show like which one is right. Unfortunately, when we open up the Bible, we don't. It doesn't say it, and Ecclesiastes. Oh, and by the way, these are the essential properties to be a human. These are the essential properties to be divine. Um, but maybe let me help flesh this out a little bit more. So, if you ask me, like, okay, what are the essential properties of being a human? Like, what does it mean to be a human? And I do talk about this briefly in this book. In I think chapter 6. Yeah, that sounds right. I'm gonna say I think to be a human is to have a certain type of mind in a certain type of body. So, it seems to be a combination of these type of things. So let's talk about this certain type of body. I'm going to keep this like maybe you want to say it's a body that has a certain type of chromosome or a certain type of limbs and walks upright, like however you want to define what it is that makes a human body, right? I'm going to say, okay, you need something like this, however we define that. But that isn't enough. I think, Greg, if you took like a goldfish's mind and put it in like a human body, I'm like, oh, that doesn't seem like it's human. It seems like it's maybe human adjacent, but it seems like we're missing like an important element here. I'm going to say like, okay, you need a certain type of mind in that body. It's like the combination of a mind that has certain type of properties in a body that has a certain type of properties. And then I'm going to keep the certain type of properties there. I'm going to keep that vague too. Maybe, let's say we sat down and we hashed out what are the properties the mind needs to have. Maybe it's like rationality, like moral responsibility, self-reflection, like whatever. What I'm going to say, and here I'm drawing from the work of guys like William Lane Craig, is what I'm going to say is I think that the person of Jesus, the Logos, the Son, whatever, I'm going to say he was a mind that had all those properties prior to the incarnation. In order to be considered a human, all he needed to be considered a human is he just needed to have that mind in a human body. And so at the incarnation, then he meets those two criterias of the divine stuff, which I know we haven't talked about those properties yet. But when he does that, now the one property he was missing, so to speak, in order to be human, now he has that property because he's embodied. And so that's how I approach that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, can I
Hmm.
stop you there? Because that's really interesting what you just said. Because the LDS conception, I'm gonna stop sharing just for a minute so
Yeah,
people
no
can see
problem.
our faces and then we can pull back up. That sounds very similar to something we would say, because we would say something like we're the same kind of being as God. God is greater than us in all ways, but he's not something of a different ontological status. Like
Hmm.
he has knowledge and we have knowledge. Sure, he has all knowledge, but it's not
Hmm.
a different kind of thing. And so it sounds like what you're saying is the pre-incarnate Jesus had a mind that was human-like and then went to a human body and became fully human. And that seems to be what LDS people are saying too. Now, you might say something different about the Father. I'm not sure what you would say about the Father. But as far as like how we are imagining Christ becoming human, that's basically what we're imagining as well. Am I missing anything there?
No, I think that's along the right lines of what I'm saying. So I think Mullins talks about this as like God in a bod view. So it's kind of like a two-part Christology. Because there's this other controversy that comes up in the early church of like, okay, how does God become incarnate? What does that mean? Stuff like that. And there's this guy Apollinarius, I think is how you pronounce his name, who comes to be regarded as a heretic. And he's just like, yeah, you have like normally with humans you have like the body and the soul, but with God like the human soul is replaced with like the soul, the logos, and so on and so forth. And then he gets a kind of accused of being a heretic because like, oh, now you're de denying that he has a human mind. But Craig has kind of articulated what he calls Neo-Apollinarianism, and he kind of like refurbishes this a bit along the lines that I was just talking about, and saying like, no, Jesus like had a human mind. It's just that what it means to be a human mind is it's not the case that there's like this divine mind and the divine mind takes on a human mind and a human body,
Yeah.
and so you have like all that stuff going on. It's just like the divine mind, like it's only really missing like a few properties in order to be considered a human mind, with the most important I think being like being in a human body. And so once that's done, the same mind can be considered both human and divine. And so
Hmm.
this is important because this comes up in conversations about like, Jesus having two minds, but also comes up in discussions about like Jesus having two wills, or two intellects or things like that. So here's the type of rhetoric, and this is something that bothers me, is you have this type of rhetoric was like, okay, we know Jesus is fully human, and so he has to have a human mind. And then we say, okay, we know he's fully divine, so he has to have a divine mind. There we go. If he has to have a human mind and he has to have a divine mind, bada bing, bada boom, we've got two minds. Like that's simple. And if you deny that Jesus has like two minds or two intellects, two wills, whatever, like stuff in this, kind of area, what they're going to say is like, well, which one do you reject? Do you reject that he has a divine
Hmm.
mind, or do you reject that he has a human? And this is like I was thinking about earlier. It's like imagine I said I have a room. And I said, there is a person in that room who is an American citizen, and there's a person in that room who is a Canadian citizen. Therefore, we have two persons in the room. That just doesn't follow because the same person can
Hmm.
meet the properties to be both Canadian and American. And that's what I'm going to say with the stuff about Jesus having two wills or two minds or intellects, whatever. I'm saying the same, thing can meet the conditions to be both at the same time. And so we don't need to multiply minds and wills and intellects and what like that, just kind of willy-nilly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So let's just summarize if I'm getting this right. Oh, let me share my screen again. And then maybe we'll move on just because we've already spent half of our time and we're only on question one. Okay. So you're going to get out of kind of the contradiction that I laid out here. And I'll
Hmm.
just finish my argument. These attributes, this is premise three, these
Hmm.
attributes are defined by being opposite of each other. So incorporeal and corporeal are exact opposites. So therefore, being in possession of both attributes simultaneously is logically impossible. You're saying, okay, I'm not going to say he's in possession of both of these attributes simultaneously, but I
Hmm.
am still going to say he's fully human and fully God, but it's not essential to be fully God to be incorporeal or timeless or immutable or impassible.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So and I'll add a little bit more on that, and some of this I think will come back up when we talk about the last question, which is the Trinity. So maybe we're justified in spending this much time on it, but I'll just add on there like how I'm going to answer what it means for Jesus to be fully God. It's going to be different than a lot of my other people. It's more close to my camp are going to answer things, and I talk about this in my more recent book. I don't, because I'm a partialist, I'm not going to say that in order for Jesus to be called fully God or fully divine or anything like that, I'm not going to say that he has to possess or exemplify all the properties that God as a whole has. I think Jesus can
Hmm.
be called God, can be called fully God, called divine, stuff like that. I think he can be called that because of the part-whole relationship that he stands in to the Godhead. And here's kind of a fun little analogy I give to kind of get this point across. What makes an action a divine action? It's like whether the action is done by God, right? Okay, what makes a thought a divine thought? Whether the thought is in the mind of God. Well, what makes it a person a divine person? I was like, oh, it's a person and the divine being, so on and so forth. So I think this is intuitive. I think I talk about this a bit more in my book. And maybe we can this might come back up again with the Trinity stuff. So we can put a pin in it here if you want, and then potentially circle back around to it, or if you want to, press me or stuff on that now, you're more than welcome to.
No, I think we're good. I think I don't see how any of this would be off limits for an LDS person to think this way as well. So I think this could be helpful for our own conceptions of how we're going to put things together. I know there's things in the LDS purview that you would reject, James, but I
Hmm.
think I think what you've laid out here is at least compatible with our other beliefs. That so I
Yeah,
think these could help refine our own thinking on these kind of things.
yeah, I had another LDS gentleman reach out to me once about my Trinity stuff and say that it
Mm.
was kind of similar, I think, in thought to some of the stuff they were saying. And when I listened to a bit of the recent debate between God Logic and Jacob Hansen, and there's things I'm like, I think Jacob's actually pretty close at having something that would be a fine Trinitarian view. Like there's some stuff I would tweak in it to make it there, but I'm like, actually, I think you're pretty close. Like we could just tweak a few things here or there, and it'd probably be fine. So, yeah, I don't think this stuff is at least as far as I know, you're probably a better judge on what's compatible with LDS theology than I am. But it seems like yeah, it seems like this is open for you.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, let's move on. So maybe as an open theist, this might not be as problematic for you.
Hmm.
I don't know if you want to try to answer from a more mainstream Christian perspective first, and then maybe give
Hmm.
your view as an open theist. Because I
Yeah.
have a feeling I won't argue with you much once you give
Hmm.
your view as an open theist. But if you don't want to, because it's not your view, I also
That's
totally
fine.
understand that. So, why is there a hell? It seems to me that mainstream Christians are saying that God made every part of us, our free will, our propensity to choose or reject Him, our propensity towards righteousness or evil. And ultimately, because those decisions lead to our, eventual decision to choose heaven or hell, it seems to me that God is the ultimate source of all of those decisions and ultimately responsible for them because He created our propensity towards rejecting or accepting him. And I don't see how he couldn't have just made us differently so that we did accept him, you know? Like if he foresaw my decision to reject him and he created every part of me, why could he not make me differently in such a way that I would accept him?
Yeah, so I'll make a little bit of just maybe helpful clarification or a helpful distinction. So there's roughly three views that a person can take towards like hell and the fate of the damned and stuff like that. One is probably what is associated with the thing on the screen. Like, okay, like one is eternal conscious torment. So this is the idea that like people who are damned are forever they exist, they're conscious and they're in torment and they know it. Like they're aware of it. They're just having a bad time like forever. And then there's a second category, which is becoming more popular and has been causing quite a stir recently, is the idea of like, okay, people who like don't make it into the kingdom, they're just destroyed, they're annihilated. So this view is called
Mhm.
annihilationalism, and God's just like, okay, like you reject me, like bye, and he destroys them. And then like the lake of fire, whatever, may be seen as like the means through which that destruction comes. So that's option two. And then option three is universalism, which is just like actually everybody gets in. Maybe you're in hell for just a temporary amount of time, and then you're like, yeah, you think about the bad things you did and you repent and what off. I'm being kind of flippant here, but I think you get the point. Um, so those are kind of the three views. Obviously, universalists are going to be like, well, like you're going to make it in, so like this isn't going to apply to them, so we'll like shelve them. And like I'm not a universalist, so we'll talk about these other things. I think where maybe an issue here is I don't think either myself or even like mainstream like Christian thought outside of something like Calvinism is going to say that God specifically like programmed you with all your dispositions, desires, and whatnot. I think there are some I think some in the Calvinist tradition are going to end up saying something like that, and I think that position, like I think Calvinism is just like cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Yeah, like I just like it's like just and like it's so ridiculous to me. Because something you'll see in like a Calvinist tradition, thought is you might hear someone say like, "Oh, but like you're free according to do like what you desire, or you're free to do according to like your nature or whatever." And you're like, "Okay, but like, where did my nature come from? Where did my desire come from?" And then they're like, "That's gonna be like, oh, like God gave you that." It was like, if God gives me the desires, and then I can only help but like follow my desires, like that doesn't seem like I'm actually free. So outside of like a Calvinist like tradition, which is just so silly. I think people are going to say like your dispositions, your desires and stuff like that. Um, God doesn't specifically like create a person and be like, okay, I'm making Jeffrey today. You know what? I feel like putting a dash of cannibalism in this one. Like I just feel like we gotta keep them on their toes. We gotta shake things up. Um, the kind of position that I think people are going to take is they're going to say something like we maybe have like desires and whatnot that are evil and bad, and these desires come from either like we have a sinful nature and people can like articulate that line of thought, or like we are in this position in which we are limited and finite and we are subject to temptation to like the devil and so on and so forth, and he's trying to get us to do bad things, and so maybe we go off and we follow those bad desires or so on and so forth. Um, C.S. Lewis has this kind of quote along the lines of like, we have this little dial that's in each one of us, and we're either all turning ourselves into a heavenly creature or a hellish creature. And so this is idea like we choose to practice virtue, we choose to practice vice, like we choose to, and this actually kind of goes with some thoughts that Aristotle had about virtue being something you practice, like you get better and better at. And so I think, the type of person that we end up becoming, like whether or not we reject God and we, engage in sin and stuff like that, or whether or not we choose to follow him and be obedient and submit ourselves to him. That's something that God creates us in a state where we can choose to go either way. Like he kind of creates us in a state where we can choose to point ourselves this way and continue down that line, or we can point ourselves this way. And I think that God creates us in that state. There's a lot of ways you could cash this out. I think he creates us in that state because if he wants to have a friendship or like a loving relationship with us, it needs to be something for that to be a really meaningful relationship or friendship or whatever. It needs to be something that's freely chosen and like not, forced upon us. So yeah. Do you want to poke and prod a bit about that?
Yeah, I'm gonna pull up, oh, I'm gonna stop sharing here for a second. And I'm gonna pull up how I phrased this earlier because I figured you'd say something like this. So,
Yeah.
okay. So what is it that makes someone go to hell and others not? Is their nature not informing their decisions? Like it's their nature that's informing their decisions, right? And who made their nature? Well, it's either their nature or maybe continuing like it's nature or nurture, right? Um, but you're kind of saying we're born in a neutral state or something like that. And so are you saying like our natures are not created or made by anything exterior to ourselves? So it wouldn't be nature or nurture. It's like God didn't instill us with a nature, a propensity towards sin, let's say. Um, we're instead developing that within ourselves.
Yeah, so maybe some of the confusion comes from I'm kind of tiptoeing along certain like theological lines. So there are going to be some people who are going to say, this is something you'll see a lot in maybe like mainstream like Christianity, is they'll say something like we all have a sinful nature, like because of Adam, like just in virtue of being human, you have this thing, it's called the sinful nature, and like that's why you sin. It's like this desire to do like evil, bad things and a disposition to do that and whatnot. Um, you have like Michael Heiser, he's like, yeah, I don't think that's the case. I'm actually probably persuaded with him. I don't think that there's like this specific thing called like the sinful nature that's like infected us genetically or something like that. So
Sure.
like I'm trying to kind of give an answer like that could apply to like depending on where you fall along those lines. So let's say I go with the nature thing, right? Um, I'm gonna say like if I'm in this kind of like sinful nature category of thought, something I might say is like I think that God creates humans just in general, maybe even like pre-fall and whatnot. God creates humans where they have the ability to go like right or left, so to speak. And then after that, maybe like you and I, maybe because of that, we have this nature that is like a pull or a desire to do um, sinful things, right? And maybe we have that. But what I'm going to say is like, well, we may have that. But God hasn't just like left us to that. It's not like that's not something that is like an overriding, um, it's not like an overriding thing where it's like, oh, I got this nature, I just have to go like kill somebody or something or other. It's something that we can recognize and we can, with the grace of God, fight against, and God will strengthen us to, He'll perfect us, we'll be made holy, things like that. So I think maybe the way to think about it is you and I, we may have a sinful nature if we're in this, kind of camp. We may have the sinful nature in which that we have this propensity to sin. But ultimately, God extends the offer, and he offers the empowerment out of that to everyone. But there are a group of people who, when confronted with God's call, offer, however you want to phrase it, they say, I'm gonna go sin. I'm to sin is like really great. I'm super into that, and like forget you, God, and they just continue down that line. And at that point, I think the reason they go to hell then or are destroyed or whatever, it's going to be because like they just use their free will, they use their free agency to reject God instead of to pursue him. And so I'll pause there. Yeah, before I does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, maybe. Um, I'm not sure I still have my mind wrapped around how like true libertarian free will works.
Let me
Anyway, my brain always gets a little
yeah,
just good.
let me
But let me
mhm,
ask you
mhm.
something.
Yeah.
So it is still our nature that's informing our decisions, but you're saying it's not informing it deterministically. In other words, it
Hmm.
doesn't, we're not like we may have the desire to sin, but we are not foreordained, determined,
Hmm.
mandated to sin based on that desire. We still have a free will to choose to reject that nature, those urges, etc.
Hmm.
Um, but it is still our nature that's influencing those decisions, right? So
Yeah.
why could God not have made our nature in such a way that we freely didn't do that? So he can
Yeah.
still wiggle the knob, right? Because some people, he clearly knows how to make people that can go to heaven. So why didn't
W-
he wiggle the knob appropriately so that we all had those kind of natures that would send us to heaven freely? Like I'm not even requiring deterministic
Yeah. But
y-
I think we have a contradiction here. So God can't make you do something freely. So if we're going to say, okay, I want God to create a person who 100 times out of 100 times will freely choose to follow him, that doesn't seem like it's free. It seems like he's baking into the starting conditions that they're always going to follow him, right? It seems like there has to be like a real possibility or a real chance here for them to go AWOL, so to speak. So I don't think, yeah, I think that's God can't guarantee if he's actually giving us real freedom, he can't make us so that we always choose him. He can make us in a state that he can, reach out to us and present himself to us and try to woo us, so to speak. That's kind of the way I present things in this book. I talk about God kind of trying to woo us, and because like humanity's kind of gone off the rails, and we decided we wanted to flirt with Satan and the cosmic baddies and all of that, and so we went after false gods. That's one of my fun slogans. If you watch some of my content, I talk about Satan and the cosmic baddies. Maybe I need to make a t-shirt with that on it. Yeah, so I think that yeah, I just think that God can't make us so that we for sure choose him. I think that's a contradiction with free, like
well,
the kind of definition of free will.
let me push back on that a little bit because I know you're not a Molinist,
Hmm.
but if you're kind of defending a broader Christian perspective that's non-Calvinist,
Hmm.
non-Calvinist but not open theist, so Arminians or Molinists, they're going to say something like God sees the future perfectly, but we still have free will decisions to make, and he's not determining our sins or anything like that. We are making our decisions, but he sees it perfectly. So I would argue that with someone who goes to heaven,
Hmm.
in that view, God did, with a surety, make them in such a way that they would choose him and still gave them free will. So why can't he make all people like that? Because even
Yes.
in
Hmm.
your own, in those views, there are people who are 100% going to heaven and they have 100% free will, right? So
Yeah.
I don't think I'm saying anything crazy here. I think I'm drawing that conclusion from
Hmm.
Molinism and Arminianism.
Yeah, yeah. So let's set up a thought experiment. So let's say we have a world of 10 people. Let's just keep it nice and simple. There's like 10 people, you, me, and eight other people, right? Um, so let's say God's looking at this world. And so I'm operating under a Molinistic framework here, right? So I'm
Yeah.
not a Molinist anymore, but I'm play the part on TV. So let's suppose God's looking at this world. and he says, okay, I'm considering creating in this way, like let's say option one. And he looks at it and he says, okay, if I create an option one and I set up these conditions, I know that five people are gonna come to know me, right? So in that scenario, I don't think it's that God is creating people and making them choose them. He's setting up a set of conditions in which he knows, okay, if I set up this kind of wall, this is how many people are going to choose me. Five people are going to choose me, and then five people won't, right? So what you're saying is like, okay, if God can see beforehand when he's setting up these conditions that, there's going to be these five people that choose him and these five people who don't, like, why not just not create those five people who don't? Or like, why not just create the five people who do, so on and so forth? Is that kind of an accurate
Mhm.
gist?
Sure.
Yeah. So this is a an idea that William Lane Craig, who's like a big proponent of Molinism on the modern sphere that he's talked about, what he's going to say is he's going to say, so like these people, like the way they end up, that's the result of like this set of conditions that they're in, right? And he's going to say, well, if you remove those five peoples from the world, now you've changed the set of conditions. Like the unfolding of, God's creation, now is completely different. Now there's half as many people in it. Now there is the interactions we have with each other, the events that are going to occur. Now we're just in a whole new world. And so in that scenario, it may be that if you remove those five people, it may be then now that five people who are left, maybe they don't all still come to you. Maybe like only one does or something like that. And so someone a Molinist, they're going to say like when God knows in all these different scenarios, he knows that like if he alters this thing, he knows how it's going to affect all the other things. So in the new world, if he changes this variable, he knows how it's going to affect all these other variables. And so what they're going to say is God actually picks a world in which they may say something like this: God picks a world in which the most amount of people come to know him, or something like that. And if we were to, like change these variables and whatnot and say, okay, God just creates a world. Let's say God just creates a world where everyone comes to know him. That may be a world of 10 people. That may be a
Mhm.
world of no people, actually. That it may just be like the way they think about like God's counterfactual knowledge and stuff like that. They actually may say that in any world in which God creates free, creatures, maybe at least one sense or something like that. Now, because I'm not a Molinist, I have several thoughts about this. One thing is I'm gonna say I have issues with God having this type of knowledge of what someone will do in certain circumstances if those circumstances haven't occurred. I talk about this a bit in a video that I posted a while ago. It's I was responding to someone named Theus Brooks. I'll try to. Oh yeah. So I have this video. Can we have free will if God knows the future? A response to Theus Brooks. I think that's probably the most recent like video I made where I talk about this idea.
I can link it
Um,
in the bio too, if
yeah,
you send
yeah.
it to me.
So I this idea of like if it hasn't happened yet, like if the reason that this statement is true, like James will do that, like why is that statement true? Well, it seems it needs to be because of like I'm the one who makes that decision. But like if I haven't made that decision yet, how can it be true? That's like a super simplified like version of it. So I have this concern with like I don't think that God can know these things because I don't think these things can be true absent of like the thing that resolves the contingency. But then and this is not like an overwhelming objection to Molinism. This is just something that I do think is unsettling about this kind of like answer that I just gave. It is kind of dissatisfying to me that God creates a bunch of people who end up just kind of being like cannon fodder, like
Yeah.
in the divine plan. Like I do find that. I mean, like it may be that if I was a Molinist, I don't know that that would be the single biggest thing that persuades me. I might, if I thought Molinism was like the only viable thing on the table, I might be like, yeah, that's kind of icky, but it's just, I guess there was no other way. But I do, because I have these other issues with Molinism. I do feel like, okay, like God like creates a world of people who he knows are gonna if you hold to eternal conscious torment, like he knows they're gonna be forever having a bad time. And he does that as, cannon fodder. Like, oh, that seems kind of icky. But here's the response to that, right? So someone like William Lane Craig, their response to it is gonna say, well, listen, if God didn't create this big world because of these people who he knew would reject them, if he's like, okay, like I don't want any world where these people like come about who reject him and go to hell, he's gonna say, okay, well, like in that sense, aren't you giving the damned the ability to veto the blessed? Like, it wouldn't doesn't the opposite of that seem icky as well? Like, it seems really weird to be like, well, if God creates this world, there's going to be 10 people who reject him. And God says, "Ah, well, I don't want 10 people to burn in hell. So I guess I won't create any world at all. That way, or maybe I'll create a smaller world where there's less people who come to know me. And that world, God is in a sense letting those 10 people who are choose to reject him, he's letting them rob the other people of their ability to know him. And like that seems wrong too, right? That seems like really weird to let like the damned inflict things in a way. So that's how someone like William Lane Craig is going to respond to the, ooh, this is kind of icky objection. Yeah, I'll stop there.
No, I appreciate that. And thank you for defending a view that's not yours. I know that's but the last thing I'll say on this Molinist perspective, uh, why couldn't God just create a simulation for each individual person that is the best for their own circumstance? And then there's no cannon fodder. So you're saying
Hmm.
like there has to be, you know, so many million people that go to hell so that the right conditions can be set up for so many million people to go to heaven. Well, why not just create each person in their own fake universe to
Yeah,
have
yeah.
all the soul building experiences they need and no one that's there to give them the hell person experience, the hellbound person experience. Well, they don't actually exist. Or maybe they're in a different simulation, in a simulation that's optimized for them to help them get to heaven. Something like that. Like,
That's a good question, and that's actually something back when I was a Molinist, somebody posed to me. So again, I'm gonna put on my Molinist cap and say, okay, um, here's maybe why I think we shouldn't we shouldn't think this like we're all solipsist and I'm the only real person, right? Even if I affirm something like Molinism, someone might say something that seems like God would be engaging in like widespread systematic deception, trickery, and manipulation, which is something that is just like not okay with his nature. Like it seems like maybe they could say that that is deception and maybe even coercion to a point that would be like an intrinsically bad thing for God to do. Maybe something else they could say is something like if God did that, God would be robbing people of the ability to have real, meaningful relationships with other people. They would just be kind of having them with like these like fake people, and that is something that it would be wrong. Like there's an intrinsic good in us having this community with each other and it being real. That there's like this intrinsic good of like if you and your family, right? There's an intrinsic good in you actually loving a real another person and them actually giving love back to you and you like creating a family together and stuff like that. There's an intrinsic good there that would be robbed if God just deceived you and made you think that that was happening, but it wasn't. Like that. That almost seems like it would. I think that brings us back to the like the the wrong thing. Like imagine if you died and you're chatting with God. You're like, okay, like how'd I do? And you're talking with him, and he's like, yeah, actually, your wife, like, she didn't actually exist. Your kids, they didn't actually exist. All that time you spent worrying about them and doting on them, yeah, they were just illusions, man. Like, I just did that to get you to like me. Like that, you like, I don't know. That
but
seems like pretty wild. Like that
I
seems
don't know
like,
about that. I don't know about that. But if it's like, but alternatively, like what's worse, him creating a simulation to give all conscious beings the best possible outcome, or him, uh, putting us all in the same simulation together, and a bunch of people end up going to hell for eternity. So what's it easier to forgive God for? Is the person who feels like, oh wow, you just like all the people I just loved were not real. Like, is that a worse thing, or the person who says, you created me and now I'm going to hell for eternity, and you m made me go to hell for eternity so that you could have some other people go to heaven. Like, thanks. Like, which
but
one's worse?
yeah, but in that wall, the person who goes to hell, like they still have the moral responsibility for them going to hell. So it's not like that God made them do that. So in that wall, um, the person who goes to hell, like the moral weight of that decision, it's still on them. Um, and
I don't know
so I'd
about
be
that.
like, well, I mean, like it's
Because
still the case that they're freely making this decision to, reject God. So like what the Molinists can do is they can say that God extends to every person enough like revelation, enough light, whatever, so that that person has enough knowledge to make the reasonable decision to come to know them. They have enough knowledge, they have enough light, so that if they reject God, then it's on them, so to speak. And in that world, then like. I don't know that I should be like I don't know that it makes sense or is moral for God to like systematically deceive me and everyone else in these like thinking I'm building up these meaningful relationships and having these like good interactions with people. And God does all that just so I don't know, Timmy or whoever who ends up freely choosing to reject him, just so he like also gets in. Like I don't know, that doesn't strike me as an intuitively obvious. But maybe that's a different of intuition thing. And since I'm not a Molinist, I can be if you're right, I'm gonna be like all the better for open theism, right? Like I can be like all the better, right? God isn't icky
Yeah,
under
yeah,
open
yeah, yeah.
theism. He just doesn't know these. God can't put us in these simulations because God's like, I don't know all the simulations that would produce someone like this. Like I'm trying to get everybody to come. So that's my attempt at giving a Molinist response. And you may not find it convincing, and I'm not gonna be offended if you're like that. That's my best
May
guess. Yeah.
maybe that works if you're like a inclusivist. Like I
Mm.
don't know if that's the right word for it, but like obviously in historical, I'd say the majority view over history has been Hindus, Muslims, Mormons, all of you people are going to hell whether or not you received a chance to accept Jesus Christ. Oh shoot, did my video just go out?
Uh-oh. Your video has been annihilated. You've been cast into the outer
What's
darkness.
Oh no. What, you know that
Uh
word?
the outer darkness? Yeah.
Oh, that's too funny. I was getting a call and it shut my camera off for some reason. Okay.
So I'll make a comment there. So this idea of inclusivism versus exclusivism is something that I've recently been interested in and wanting to look into. I do think that there are going to be people who say actually the maybe the longstanding tradition is that people who don't get the chance to hear God, like they're not immediately screwed. Like so I'm not Catholic, but in the Catholic tradition, there's this idea of like anonymous Christians. There's ideas in the early church of righteous pagans who they didn't have this light, but they still, you know, operated based
Hmm.
on like the logos that was in them or their reasoning and so on and so forth. So yeah, I wouldn't paint maybe the large standing Christian tradition as being so pessimistic. Yeah.
So you would just to make sure I get a reality check. Do
Yeah.
you think over 50% of Christians today think that Muslims will be saved or Hindus will be saved?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know the statistics. So here's what I would need to know to answer that. And I just don't know these statistics off the top of my head. I mean, I could probably have a better answer if I did some Googling. I would need to know what percentage of Christians are like Catholic, Orthodox, so on and so forth. Um, I would need to know more about the denominational spread because I don't think probably most like Southern Baptist. I grew up Southern Baptist. I don't think most Southern Baptists are going to say there's any like Muslims in heaven or so. Or like I think a lot of people are going to be like, nope, you're just screwed. Like in one of my programs, one of the books I read was this guy who was like, yeah, there's all these people in the overseas who they're just dying in darkness and they're, you know, slipping into eternity damned and whatnot. There are going to be a lot of people who say that, but there are a lot of people who are aware of this idea in Christianity of like God judging people based on the light they've been given and this idea of inclusivism. I mean, shoot,
Hmm.
I mean, C.S. Lewis, right, who is a really incredibly influential thinker in Christian thought. He has a line where he talks about this, where he says, "We know people can't be saved apart from Christ. What we don't know is whether or not they have to know about Christ in order to be saved by
Hmm.
him, or something along that." So even Lewis flirts with this idea of like, yeah, you could have people who you know, don't know this. William Lane Craig, who's a very influential, you know, Protestant
Sure.
theologian, he talks about this. I think it might be him that uses the analogy of it's almost as if like you had a rich relative who died and left you an inheritance that you didn't know anything about. You know, it's almost like that's kind of an analogy he gives that might be the case for these people. Um, I have no clue as far as if you were to poll every Christian. I'm reluctant to even give a guess, honestly.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. I don't have the statistics either, so that was just my impression, but not more than an impression. So, um, maybe we'll count that good for the hell question.
Mhm.
It's been over the hour that I said we were going to go for. Do we want to quickly go over the Trinity, or should we call it there for the day?
I personally I have the time, like it's fine. So if you have the time, I'm more than welcome to dabble in the Trinity.
Okay, let's dabble in the Trinity. Let's pull up
Yeah.
my slide here. Okay, past the sad hell slide. Now we're on to the Happy Trinity
Look at that. It's
slide.
bright. It's light. It's so great. Like,
Right? That's so much better. Well, you think it's bright and light. This is the LDS, this is straight off the LDS website. So you just gave a compliment to the LDS,
well, listen,
portrayal of the Godhead.
the guy on the right's he's a bit less bright. So we've got subordination in the Trinity. So I'm messing with
Uh,
you.
no, so my general question here, and this one, like, I don't know if you consider yourself a social
Hmm.
Trinitarian, but I don't see a huge difference between like the LDS view of the Godhead and the social Trinity. But here's what I'm gonna say. So the idea of three in one, there's nothing contradictory about that inherently.
Hmm.
I'm one person and I'm a father, a husband, and an employee, right?
Hmm.
But I think it gets complicated when you start asking mainstream Christians in what sense are they one and in what sense are they three. And for an
Yeah.
LDS person, this isn't hard. We can say they are one in purpose, in love, in shared experience. They are three in their wills, center of like they have a united will,
Hmm.
but they are still three separate wills. Three centers of consciousness, and they each have a distinct role in salvation. So it's not hard for LDS people to give this one in three answer. But when I start asking mainstream Christians, it gets really confused, particularly if you layer divine simplicity over this,
Yeah.
because with divine simplicity, I don't see how you can have any distinctions between the persons. How do you have Jesus being unique in any way? And for those who might not know what divine simplicity is, and you can correct me on this, James, if I don't explain this correctly, but it's basically to say that God, it has no parts, no distinctions. Um, everything that Basically everything that we say about God has to apply to all of God. And so I just fail to see how we could make any distinctions and how they could be three in any sense.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts there, and how would you
Yeah.
parse out the Trinity?
Yeah, so I think divine simplicity is just incoherent nonsense. I don't think it's compatible with the Trinity. This is an area that again I'll reference Ryan Mullins. He's written stuff about this. I think he recently came out with a book called like Five Views on Divine Simplicity. I haven't picked it up because it's like 80 something dollars for the ebook, and I love you, Ryan, but like I just not right now. Like I was like, oh, okay, cool, I'll go check this out. But he has papers and whatnot on his website that you can find where I think he engages with some of this. Yeah, I don't think that you can make sense of divine simplicity in the Trinity. Yeah, divine simplicity is just an incredibly odd doctrine. It's not just that God doesn't have parts. It is that everything intrinsic to God is identical to God. So like, all of God's actions, I'm going to say this in a way that's kind of a little bit sloppy, but I'm going to say it to get the point across. All of God's actions are identical to each other and identical to God. All of God's properties are identical to all of each other and all of God's actions and to God himself. I put that in parentheses because there's like a tradition in divine simplicity that like denies that God even like has properties and attributes and whatnot. So like God is identical to his wisdom, which is identical to his creation of the world, which is identical to XYZ, so on and so forth. Like it's a bizarre doctrine that like if you say like I don't what does that even mean exactly? Yeah, it is I think that it is just like this bleeding zombie in the history of Christianity that just refuses to die. So I share in this confusion and this dissatisfaction with how the Trinity is articulated by a lot of Christians. So I'm a partialist. I think the persons of the Trinity, I think there's a porthole relationship going on between like Jesus and Yahweh. And I've had a specific partialist model that I've held to, and then I started flirting with another one, and then I think I'm now leaning towards this other one, but I'm still very sympathetic to this other one. So um, I think that among people who aren't partialist, when it comes to understanding what they're saying, I'm just like, you've lost the plot. Like, I just don't understand. And that is something that even, so here's a, among people who want to not be partialist and they want to say that every person in the Trinity is identical to Yahweh. Like, they all want to say, like, they're all identical to God. Um, there's this view called relative identity. And one of the main critiques that's been raised against it is like, we just don't understand what you're saying. So William Hasker, in one of his books on the Trinity, he phrases it something like, when you give me these statements of this like doctrine, I understand each of these words in isolation, and I can even understand some of these phrases, but when you put them all together, like I just don't know what this is mapping onto in reality.
Right.
Tim Paul, who is and William Hasker is like no slouch when it comes to metaphysics and like analytic philosophy. Like he's a pretty heavy hitter. Like he's not just like a guy who just hasn't studied anything. Tim Paul, who has written some works defending conciliar Christology, he's kind of more like a traditional Orthodox perspective. I saw a clip from him in an interview where he said something along the lines of like, "Here's my autobiographical lament. I just can't make sense of this doctrine." Like that's me summarizing a bit. Like so, like it's there are people in mainstream Christian tradition who some of these like strategies to make sense of the Trinity of like relative identity and whatnot. Like, yeah, I've had conversations with people who hold to those things, and I'm just like, I can't follow this. So okay, so here's how I do things. Um, I think that there is one divine soul. So this is how we'll start with Craig. So this is how William Lane Craig articulates things, and this is a model that I've been influenced by, and I've maybe tweaked a bit. But Craig is going to say something like, "You have one divine soul." So I'm a soul, and I have like a set of cognitive faculties is sufficient for personhood, right? What Craig is going to say is, God is a divine soul who has multiple centers of consciousness. So it's kind of one soul, one spirit, and just within that one spirit, there are these distinct persons, and they stand in a porthole relationship. Now, Craig has in the past explicitly said like porthole language, but now he's kind of like shying away from it because he just, I don't know. I'm reluctant that he's like not standing the ground for partialism. I'm just like, yeah, I'm a partialist. Come fight me. So I think that I think this is fine. I think this is a way to make sense of this. Craig has given some examples, which has gotten people in a tizzy. So he gives the example of Cerberus, like in Greek mythology, the dog that guards the gates of hell. Um, it's one dog, but like let's say it's one dog that has three heads, and let's say each one of those three heads of Cerberus, he gives them cute names. I think it's like Rover, Bowser, and Spike or something like that. Let's say Rover, Bowser, and Spike. Let's say they're like really smart dogs, so they're sufficient for personhood, right? In that scenario, you have one dog. Like Cerberus is one dog, but that dog has, like three persons. And then he kind of teases some other stuff out with that. So I think something like that. I think that can make sense of the Trinity, and that's an idea that I've had for a good bit. And then that kind of comes back to um, what I'm going to say is someone like Jesus, like even if he becomes incarnate and he empties himself of knowledge, power, stuff like that, I'm going to say like he is still a divine person. Like we can point at him and say that's God, because of this porthole relationship that he stands in, and he can be called God, and he can be referred to as fully divine because of that. So let me give kind of some analogies and whatnot to play with. Behold my hand in all of its glory, right? Like I can point at my hand and say, "This is my hand." So I can point at my hand and say, "This is my body." It's true, that's my body. I can point at this hand. I can say, "This is my body." I can point at my face. I can say, "This is my body." All those things are true. All three of those things that I was referencing, they have different properties from one another, right? But I can
Right.
point at each one of those and say, like, that's my body, because it's normal to refer to parts with language of the whole. And so what I'm going to say is like when the divine soul of Jesus, when he comes and he is walking around and hanging out with us, I think we can point at him and say, that's God, like that's Yahweh in the flesh right there. And like we can do that. And that makes sense. And again, behold my hand, right? I can point at my hand and say, this is a fully human hand. Like my hand isn't part canine. Like I don't have claws coming out. Like it's not like I don't have gills on it. Like this is a fully human hand. But my hand is not all of a human. Like if you found this in the wood by itself, like that is not by itself a full human. So it is fully human without being the fullness of a human.
Right.
And so this is how I think about God and the Trinity and whatnot. Okay, so I want to so I talk about this a good bit in this book, and one of the things I do in this book is I ground this concept in ancient Near Eastern conceptions of divinity. So in when we look at how people conceptualize things in the ancient world, the kind of way that we see people thought about deity, it's essentially like this, like I was just talking about. So if it's okay with you, I actually just want to read like maybe like half a paragraph or two of my book where I draw on a specific Jewish scholar who he looked at a bunch of conceptions of divinity in the ancient world and how things were talked about, and then he applied this to things we see in the Old Testament. It would take maybe probably less than a minute. Is that cool?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so Jewish scholar Benjamin Sommer, he's surveyed ancient literature from areas such as Canaan, Egypt, Israel, Mesopotamia, and concluded that we find in the ancient Near East, quote, a peculiar understanding of divine selfhood, according to which a deity can produce many small-scale manifestations that enjoy some degree of independence without becoming separate deities, end quote. Sommer refers to this understanding as a fluidity model in which, quote, gods could have multiple bodies and fluid selves, end quote. He goes on to state, he has a quote, somehow it was possible for various local and even heavenly manifestations of a single God to be effectively identical with each other and also distinct from each other, end quote. So I'll stop there and then I'll kind of summarize some of the rest. So there's this idea, and Michael Hunling talks about this. Michael Hunling is also a scholar who's looked at like kind of cultural aspects of the ancient Near East and how they think about divinity. And he talks about this idea that when we look at a god and its various local manifestations, there's this idea that the divine soul or essence or substance or whatever, it is divisible without diminishment. And so the divine soul can come and embody an idol or an image, what we would call it, and then that's one of the bodies of the god. So you can point at that and say like that's Ishtar or whatever. And that, kind of small scale manifestation or that image of the god, it is fully the God. It possesses all the like the divine potency of the God, but it is not the fullness of the God. Ishtar or whoever, whatever the God is, it is kind of the conglomerate or like all of the God's manifestations and bodies and images taken together. Like that is like what the God is. That's the fullness of the God. And so this idea of like you have a God who's just like this, kind of immaterial, however you want to cash it out, the spirit, the soul, the substance, and it can manifest in various different locations and have different bodies. And these are things that have some type of different degrees of independence, and they can kind of like they're still part of the God, they're still the God, but they're kind of not in the sense of like there's some degree of like independence and whatnot. That is a way of viewing things in the Old Testament, like the angel of the Lord. So Benjamin Sommer, when he applies this framework that he sees in the ancient Near East, he applies that to things like the angel of the Lord and certain embodied manifestations of Yahweh in the Old Testament. And I think this is a really fertile ground for thinking about um, the Trinity and how people in that culture came to think about these kind of manifestations of Yahweh. And then there's other stuff that as time progresses, I would layer into that. But in a nutshell, that's kind of how I think about these things. Is you have these parts of the divine being, and that's who the Father, Son, Spirit, and that's who they are. Does that make sense? Was that a lot at one point?
I think it makes sense. I still am not sure how that makes sense of them being one soul.
Hmm.
So let me ask you this. Let's say you have conjoined twins
Hmm.
with two centers of consciousness. Would
Hmm.
you consider that two souls or one soul? So this kind of
Um,
this is related to the Cerberus
yeah, it is.
analogy you gave.
So this is interesting. So because someone like Craig with the Cerberus example, he thinks like if they died, it would be one soul. It would be one, canine soul or whatever. With the conjoined twins, I think you have two souls there. But I think the reason is like that's like the conjoining there, that's like an improper binding. That's like not a that is how do I phrase this? I guess the natural relationship or the proper relationship is you would have two distinct bodies with two distinct souls, and then what happened is something happened on the physical level where like these two things got like the two physical things got fused. Whereas I think with something like let's go back to the Cerberus example, like it seems like that's not what went on with Cerberus. Like it seems like Cerberus is essentially like this three-headed dog, or Cerberus is like properly and naturally like this tripartite being. So it's a bit
Well,
difficult with that. Yeah.
I would push back on that because like Cerberus, I don't think there's anything natural about Cer. I think he's fantastical and strange because he is something that is so it's maybe not something that's like naturally occurring. I think our natural instinct is that a center of consciousness is its own being, right? I think that's the natural, and I think so Cerberus, if there's three centers of consciousness, I fail to see how that's not three beings with some mutual properties, right? So,
Mhm.
which center of consciousness is controlling the head, which is controlling the legs? But that it still seems to me there's three collaborating centers of consciousnesses. And I think that's why I bring up the conjoined twins, because when we apply it to humans, I think it becomes obvious that we're talking about two different souls, two different beings.
Hmm.
And so I just fail to see how, well, first of all, do you accept that the Trinity has three separate centers of consciousness? And I know
Yeah.
not all Christians would. In fact, I would say most probably wouldn't. Actually, I would say most trained Christians probably wouldn't. Most lay Christians might.
Yeah. I
And
think you.
then
Mhm.
some like open theist types probably would accept that as well, or social Trinitarians, people like that.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
anyway, so you would say there are three centers of consciousness,
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
I
I think there are
just,
three distinct centers of consciousness. Yeah.
yeah, and at that point, I just don't know why you'd be calling them one soul or one being. Like, in what sense are they one?
Yeah, yeah. So I think we would call them one because they stand in that porthole relationship with the entirety. So whether or not they constitute three beings, it's just going to depend on how we define being. And actually, this is something that kind of comes up with like tritheism objections. So someone might say like, okay, listen, you've got like one divine person, you've got another divine person, and so on and so forth. Therefore, you have three gods. And my response to this is to flippantly be like, yeah, it just depends on how you define God. So
Yeah,
under some definitions of God, yeah, I've got three gods under my view, and like now what? And so my one of the things I do in my book is like, listen, um, we're not required to deny the existence of like more than one God, just like in under any definition whatsoever. Like I think we have this this constraint with scripture of this idea of like there's one God who like is the most high and like, he's different from all the others. He's really like he created them, so on and so forth.
sure.
And I know with the creation stuff, there may be areas of LDS theology that you would, differ with me there. But um, oh, sorry, I forgot my train of thought. So what I would say is like, it's not okay. There we go. So it's not that we just have to deny the existence of multiple gods under any definition. It's that under certain conditions, like there are certain things about Yahweh that we need to say specifically. And so there may be under certain definitions of beings that you would say that the Father is a distinct being from the Son. But what I'm going to say is like I still think that even if that's the case, I think they are all part of one larger being, or that there's a porthole relationship there, at least under we're still talking about the Craig model here. Under Craig's model, they are still distinct beings who are still together in one and um, form the one being of Yahweh. So maybe there are three beings who make one being. But in that scenario, um, I think of that as like they're centers of consciousness, and this is just how I think about it. They're centers of consciousness. They are still within this one whole. Like there's still this one whole of this like
Hmm.
divine substance, like this divine stuff, and they're still all part of that. And you may point to like things in that and be like, okay, there's this thing in this whole which is has this set of properties and it's different from this, and maybe by some definitions, like because it has these distinct properties, it's a separate being. And I'm like, okay, but like it's still one, like there is still one being of which they are all a part. And so they're one in that sense. I hope that makes sense. Did it? It's okay if it didn't.
Yeah,
You'd be
yeah,
like, James, you're
no,
still
no,
talking
maybe
nonsense.
so. Um, Maybe so. Yeah, this will be my last question on this, maybe. So with the Cerberus example, I think we
Hmm.
can clearly outline the properties that they share that makes them one. For instance, we could say they probably all have one heart, they have one set of legs and arms, they have these things that make them one. Can you, like under your model, what would be the things that make the Trinity one God or one being?
Yeah, I think I'm going to say that they are all partaking of like that kind of one divine substance. Um, I don't know of another way to articulate this. So I think like people are gonna hate me for this. So like if you think of like Play-Doh, right? Like I would maybe you form a face on one side of the Play-Doh, and maybe you form like a face on the other side of the Play-Doh, and so on and so forth. And let's say like you're really great, and so like you somehow like that. that face I make and this kind of blob. I have a big blob and I don't take a part out and I put it somewhere else. I just like kind of form a face on one side, I form a face on another, so on and so on. In that sense, I have this one object, which is my blob of Play-Doh, right? But though and I have those three faces, but those three faces are all still one thing. Like they're all that one blob. And it's because they're all kind of participating or from or found in that like one blob of Play-Doh. And so like if the divine substance, essence, life force, whatever you want to call it, is kind of the blob of Plato, so to speak. And right now, there are large scales of Thomists are having heart attacks hearing me right now. I just want you to know that, like if at least three Thomists have died hearing me talk about this. Like they are KO'd. Like they are, yeah. So that's kind of how I think about this. Now, so far I've been talking about this under Craig's model, and here's where I get really spicy, right? And here's where I'm even more of a maverick. I've actually come to have a slightly different model where I'm actually like, okay, the Father is God and the Son is a part of the Father. And that's spicy. I think that's the way I'm leaning now. So this is similar but different. It's so I think about like you have the Father, he's Yahweh, like this one person. And then
Yeah.
I think of most of the stuff in my book. I don't really talk about like the Holy Spirit and whatnot in this. This is mainly just trying to figure out like the relationship like of Jesus and Yahweh and whatnot. So yeah, just put a pin in the Holy Spirit. Like no disrespect to the Holy Spirit. I just like that's not where some of my like the stuff that I was trying to answer in this book. I was like I want to laser focus on Jesus and some of the debates regarding that. Um, so the kind of way I think about this is I give this example, I give this thought experiment in my book of like imagine you have a God, he's sitting on his throne. Let's say you have God and one person, the Father, he's sitting on his throne. And let's suppose the Father sitting on his throne, let's say part of the Father is there is this distinct divine person within him. And then this distinct divine person, he sends this divine person out. So now the divine person is standing in front of the throne. And this actually is like something we see in really early Christianity. So in early Christianity, long before you get like doctrines of eternal generation. Like you get this idea that the Son is like the Father's very reason or wisdom, who like the Father always had and like conversed with and whatnot, like even before he like sent him out. So let's suppose you have the Father, he's sitting on his throne, and then the Father, like he has this person like internal to him in some sense, and then he sends him out. And so now you have a person sitting, the Father, he's on the throne, and you have the person who's sent out, the Son, who's standing in front of the throne. So you have the sitting figure and the standing figure. And now I'm going to ask you the question, who's God? I was like, okay, well, in some sense, you could point at the Father and be like he's God. Like that's the thing we started with. But then in some sense, you could like point at you could say God is both of them taken collectively, right? And I give some thought experiments about this in my book with like other porthole stuff, like a car and an engine and whatnot. So it seems like in one sense, you could point at the Father and be like, yeah, he's God. But it also seems like if I ask what God is, you could say him, like the Father. But it also seems like, well, like, okay, you could say God is both of those figures taken collectively. Like that's what God is. Like that's the entirety of it. But
Yeah.
then if I point at the Son, it seems like I can point at him and be like, well, that's God. Like that's like to use Nicene language, he's God from God, light of light, like all that. Like literally, he is God from God. And so this is kind of how I've come to think about the Trinity and Jesus's relationship to Yahweh and stuff like that. And this is admittedly I'm a minority view here. A lot of people are not going to be on board with what I just described. So this is a maverick position that I take.
Okay. Yeah, still lots of questions,
Hmm.
but this has given me good things to think about. And I'd keep you for longer, but it has been nearly 2 hours for a 1 hour episode that I promised you. So
That's
thank you, man.
fine.
Thanks for jumping
Yeah.
on. And I can tell you've spent what, tens of thousands of hours thinking about these things, studying about these things. So thank you for, you know, giving us some of your wisdom here and answering those questions.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. If people found my stuff interesting, or if they're like, "That's weird," like, why does he think that? I will say, like, this book, which again is free on Amazon as the ebook, this goes more into depth. Like, I give more quotes and I expound on more on some of the thought experiments that I talked in this. And if nothing else, if you read something like this, if you like come from a background of like the Trinity's whack, maybe that'll help you like. Maybe that'll help you even if you don't come to be like in full agreement. You might be more like, oh, I see where these guys are coming from. I see why they're saying
Hmm.
some of this stuff with like angel of the Lord or whatnot in the New Testament. So if you found this interesting, I think people might find that book interesting.
Yeah, and yeah, I just want to second that. And, you know, LDS people are a little bit um, turned off, fed up by some traditional conceptions of the Trinity or the hypostatic union or hell because they don't make sense to us. But even those conceptions are coming from sincere Christians saying, here's some biblical data, here's some biblical data. How do we smush it together and believe all of it? And that's where they're coming from. So, kind of unique thinkers like you, James, you're trying to do the same thing, but maybe in a way that makes more sense to us LDS people who are a little bit like put off by maybe classical thinking on these concepts. So definitely recommend James's stuff. For the people on my channel who are watching this, please go check out his YouTube channel, like his videos, engage on those, follow him, subscribe to him, check out those video books or those books on Amazon. They're free. Leave reviews, all the stuff. So, any
If
closing?
you like it, leave a review. If you
If
don't
you
like it, just keep it to yourself.
if you don't like it, lie and write a
Listen,
five-star review.
listen, I'm not gonna encourage lying here. This is one of those turning the inner dial moments, okay, everybody? We're gonna turn the inner dial the right way.
Nice. No, any last words from you, James? I appreciate you being on.
Man, I appreciate you coming and letting me come up and talk about this stuff. I just want you to know that there are people like not in the LDS, like some of the frustrations you say that people in the LDS community have with like these ways of talking and thinking about things. Those are shared by people like me who are in this kind of, I guess you could say this orthodox or mainstream like tradition with the Trinity and incarnation. I'm also like fed up with it. I'm also discontent with it and have issues and like I don't know what's going on here. And I'm also like fighting against it. And so, yeah, I appreciate you talking with me. I think these type of dialogues are good to, build bridges of understanding and communication and are productive. And so, yeah, I appreciate it. And I mean, it's theology conversations run long. Like it's normal. Like I mean, I'm not like super surprised that this went longer. It's no big deal. Yeah.
I appreciate that, man. Thanks for understanding. Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in on the episode.